Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another installment of the CavanKerry Press virtual reading series. You are all in for a trip tonight. One, because we are celebrating this as our 42nd virtual reading. Since 2020, we've been doing this, and now we're rounding out at 42. We're looking down the line on our way to reading 50 very soon, and I'm just so humbled and honored to be able to help continue to usher in a reading series such as this. So, this evening, we will be hearing from the one and only Kevin Carey and the one and only Bob Evans. We are going to hear from both of them for about 20 minutes. Afterwards, they'll take part in a conversation where I will facilitate and ask them a couple of different questions about their material and about how they're in conversation. If anyone has questions throughout the night, please put them in the chat because I will also usher those questions in at the end. If Kevin and Bob say anything illustrious, anything Bruce Springsteen-ish, anything infamous, put that down in the comments as well because I send back this chat message to the authors afterwards, and they just love seeing everyone gush and actually see the different things that people kind of have their interests perks about. As writers, sometimes we think things that are really going to land don't land as much as the setup. So they're going to really be interested in seeing things such as that also. But before we begin, I should do the formal introduction. So, hello. My name is Dimitri Reyes. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director here at CavanKerry Press. For a quick visual description, I am a caramel tanned male with brown and black glasses. I have a black bob that's currently growing into a mullet and a bushy beard. Sometimes I can get mistaken walking through our local libraries, bookstores, or supermarkets for a Che Guevara or an early Allen Ginsberg. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest in a CavanKerry Press series of virtual readings celebrating our authors and friends of the press. Before the reading begins, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey belongs to the Munsee Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as arts activists nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. We have added to the chat a map of native lands for you to identify which land you occupy and also links to a few resources for you to learn more and or offer your support. Finally, we wanted to take a moment to address the ongoing consequences and far-reaching implications of the new administration's assault on progressive values in the U.S., especially for communities that have been strategically underserved, poorly cared for, and exploited throughout the history of our country. While CavanKerry occupies but a small space in that publishing landscape, we have always made it our business to care for the very people whose well-being is most under threat, and our commitment remains steadfast. We believe in the power of words to uplift communities and connect individuals from all backgrounds and experiences, and we will continue to do the vital work of our publishing and programming in order to foster a safe and welcoming environment for all writers. So with this, we say Happy Pride Month and Happy Juneteenth. We will continue living every day in celebration of each other, honoring the diversity and many identities of those who work, play, and create in the United States and beyond. And without further ado, I think now is going to be a great transition to Bob Evans. And before we introduce Bob Evans, I'll read just a quick small bio. So R.G. Evans's books include Overtipping the Ferryman, The Holy Both, and Imagine Sisyphus Happy. His albums of original songs, Sweet Old Life and Kid Yesterday Calling Tomorrow Man, are available on most streaming platforms, and you can find more about him at rgevanswriter.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Evans.
Thank you, Dimitri. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me get my stopwatch going here, make sure I'm obeying the time limit. Want to thank Dimitri and Kevin Carey Press for having me here, and Kevin Carey, no press, for inviting me to read along tonight. Um, I am a 61-year-old Caucasian man with roundish glasses and a currently short gray beard, ponytail in the back, and a shirt that it's not wrinkled at all, for those of you who can't really see me. Um, so I'm going to start the reading with something cheerful. Instructions for my eulogist after Stephen Dunn. Don't open with a joke. Open with a lie. To those who knew me, it will seem true to form. Instead of praising my accomplishments, offer a list of my sins. See attached. It's time they were all brought to light. If it's an open casket, don't try to explain my Hawaiian shirt, my puka shell necklace, my Ray-Bans. Let the murmurs take care of that. If it's a closed casket, fling it open. Say, ta-da! Some jazz hands might be nice. Assure my family I'm in a better place, but that home is where the heart is. Make sure they understand you mean that last part, literally. As the service ends, invite the necromancer I've hired to step up and do his thing. If you like, you can close with a joke. 'Cause that's life, ain't it? Huh? I don't know if it's because we're equidistant from Mother's Day and Father's Day, but I have a lot of parent poems coming up here, so just be prepared for that. Here's a poem about a father. Match flare, 3 a.m. How long had he sat in the dark, eyes dilated, waiting for nothing? To get to the bathroom, I had to pass the darkened kitchen. The tiny explosion, the sudden flame, the look on my father's face, crimson and orange, sooted with shadow, caught my breath and held it like smoke inside a mouth. He lit his cigarette, blew out the match, but his face hung there in the darkness, a wide-eyed photo negative that would never be developed. I froze and watched his ghost face float in the mirrors of my eyes. It felt like all those photographs where neither of us smiled. These are mostly newer unpublished poems, too. I'll let you know toward the end where there's a couple that have been published. A poem about a mother. Belief. The world is full of omens. Spilled salt, the dropping of a spoon, maple leaves turning their silver sides up. Folk magic and divination I learned from Mother, who believed the whole world darkened at 3 o'clock on Good Friday. Itchy nose, a visitor will come. Red sky in the morning, red sky at night. A man up on the altar turning wine into blood and bread into flesh. And the biggest magic of all, spare the rod and spoil the child. It's your voice, Mother, I use when I pray, when I raise my face up to the night and say, starlight, star bright, I believe. I'm still stepping on cracks. Mother, comma, father. I saw each of them dead in hospital beds, unpeaceful, not in repose, unaware they'd become the ghosts that haunt my own mortality. One of them a mountain breeze, one of them the deep, deep woods. I am the reliquary that carries them now through this world, light as death, heavy as memory. I have to rest. I cannot rest. I have to put them down. I cannot put them down. This is another father poem, but it's a little lighter than some of those. And you have to imagine that just up until a couple of weeks ago, my beard was down Santa Claus length like this. So that's important for the poem. To the dad in ShopRite of the daughter with Downs. I'm sure you were mortified today in the bakery aisle, as I would have been had my daughter pointed toward a stranger, as yours pointed at me, wide-eyed as if spotting a cryptid, and shouted, "Look, beard!" I'm sure you only felt worse when she reached up and gently ran her fingers through the long gray tuft on my chin. I assure you, sir, her delight was no match for my own, in that moment so human, so loving. All eyes should widen to the world of wonders waiting just around the corner from the croissants and boxed pizzelles. It was such an amazing experience. And having my personal space invaded is one of my pet peeves, but it just happened and it was beautiful. The mountain. There's a mountain behind the mountain my father dreamed about. Blue ridge of its shoulders holding up the sky, leaves of oak and sycamore beckoning in a breeze that never blew. Below it, the greenbrier meanders, water too clear to be true. It washes away the poverty, the back-breaking labor, the exhaustion of violent men and hopeless women, all the hates that made the real mountain real. When I close my eyes, I can see my father's face, smiling, not raging, beckoning me back to a home that never was. His wistful eyes reminding me there's a mountain behind every mountain. This poem is braided with excerpts from a book called The Ages of Stars um, by Mamajek et al., editors. This is called Old Stars. My father refused to watch on Golden Pond, not wanting to see Henry Fonda, a star from his youth, as a weak and failing old man. One of the most difficult challenges of astrophysics is estimating the age of a star. Brad Pitt and I are the same age, I tell my daughter. She looks horrified, as if I'd become a singularity, infinitely dense, ready to collapse upon myself like a catastrophic star. A star's age cannot be measured directly, only by changes in its brightness over time. Gordon Lightfoot, ghastly, gaunt, and short of breath, wheezed sundown into the microphone. We couldn't watch. As we started to walk out, a familiar chord turned us back at the exit to watch him become the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We only know the accurate age for one star, the sun. We avert our eyes from its blinding nearness, its ancient distance reminding us, as Joni Mitchell does in her own relatively ancient way, that we are stardust. I promise that there were no parents harmed in the making of this next poem. Um, and I'd like to dedicate this poem to the late, great Philadelphia Spectrum, the old hockey and basketball arena and concert arena in Philadelphia. This is called Anthem. I've written the free bird of poems. You're hearing it right now. Any moment, your hand will rise into the air like it's 1979, Bic lighter arcing over your head. Right about here, you'll all start chanting the words together, a prayer, a hymn without music, as the house lights come up and the stadium reveals itself as a giant, single-celled creature with 10,000 hearts beating as one. When a cloud of sacramental pot wafts over your section, you'll throw back your feather-haired head and crow like a bird who's finally free of time and gravity and the curse of growing old. Toward the end, I'll leave the stage, as we all do, and you'll try calling me back, roaring like an angry sea for more. He's got to do an encore, you'll say, and if I do, or if I say, bye bye, baby, it's been a sweet love. That's a line from Freebird at the end. Oh, I meant to bring this. I'm moving 3 feet here. When I was a kid, I collected, a lot of kids collect model airplanes or model cars. I collected model Universal monsters. This is the last one that I have. This is the creature from the Black Lagoon. But I had lots of them, and the biggest box was the King Kong model. It was a big square cardboard box, and I used that box for what this poem talks about. Box full of beetles. Japanese beetles ravaged the hedgerow, so I plucked them one by one from half-eaten leaves, bronze and emerald berries. Through a flap cut in the top of a box, I secreted them away, scratching like the promise of some dark dawn. I was a boy. What did I know of tiny lives, animal needs deprived, wings rendered useless in confinement? I don't know if I did, but I hope I set them free. Now more than ever, I hope I set them free. My cat may be joining in on the fun here. He's starting to meow nearby. Um, in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, there's a beautiful round crystal plate called moon crystal, and it represents the Asian belief. In the Western world, we look at the moon and we see the man in the moon. Certain Asian countries see a rabbit, a hare, who pounds the mortar with his mortar and pestle, the elixir of life, of everlasting life. New moon. When the moon is at its brightest, already it is waning. Darkness on one edge, the great white O, a scream of dying light. As the moon is false light reflected, we see ourselves in its crags and growing shadows. The man in the moon, the hare who with mortar and pestle pounds the elixir of eternal life. Even if we wanted, we couldn't taste his wares. Only the moon comes back from darkness, gathering itself to die again, and we, eyes skyward, look beyond it to the void. Every star a wish, every wish a heaven. When I was a boy, there was a clown called Emmett Kelly Jr. who had sad hobo makeup. Um, and one of his bits was he'd take a broom and the spotlight would be on the floor and he would sweep the spotlight until it got smaller and smaller and finally swept it away. So, sweeping up the spotlight. I summon you, Emmett Kelly. Arise from the tattered tents of time. Arise like confetti from a bucket labeled fire. Arise, hobo, broom wielder, raggedy man. I summon you, saddest of clowns, by the power of sadness which makes fools of us all. I call you back into the world one last time, grease paint tragedian, to make us see the show is over. The animal cages are empty. The fat lady sang herself thin. The big top poles are failing. O painted philosopher, take up your broom, sweep the light into shrinking circles till one last pass, and it's gone. Show us the darkness we deserve, how laughter couldn't save us after all. My first wife and I divorced over 30 years ago, and I just learned about a year and a half ago that she had passed away. And to this day, despite the fact that I've moved several times and remarried, I still get mail for her at my current address. And it's spilled over into cyberspace now, too. This is called Seance. The world of direct marketing is a medium reaching out to you, dearly departed first wife. 3 decades since our divorce and as many changes of address, Progressive still wants you to know you can save when you bundle your insurance. No tarot cards, no crystal ball, just an algorithm that believes we're still together, that believes you're still alive. One flyer seems to say, give us a sign. Show us you're interested in Viking cruises. And now, 8 months since you died, in the box of a seldom used email, they want to know, dear dead one, who you plan to vote for in the fall. Of course, you never left me. haunted me long before you actually died. But I'm the only one who should know you're there in the guilty way I go on breathing, the way I venerate the one photo of you I kept, like an icon of a long-lost saint. Now, Facebook necromantically conjures your picture, tells me you're someone I might know. The veil is thin in cyberspace. I click on your image, make you my friend. A friend is better than a ghost, isn't it? Give me a sign. Dimitri, I have two poems left, so put away the big hook. I think I'll make it in time here. This is the last poem in a series of poems that I'm writing in the voices of people and places from the book of Genesis, from the Bible. Eve keeps the apple for herself. First the serpent whispered, "Eat and know what God knows." Then it shook loose the low-hanging fruit. It landed in Eve's outstretched hand with a satisfying plop. Not knowing why, she rubbed the apple vigorously against the bare skin of her forearm, which tingled pleasantly. The tingling spread. "Oh," Eve said, "sleeves. One day there will be sleeves." She gazed into the apple's shine and saw a beautiful woman staring back at her redly. The woman looked hungry. "I'm hungry," Eve thought, and brought the apple to her lips. Kiss, she thought. One day there will be kiss. She bit into the fruit and the garden filled with sound. Singing, she thought. Suddenly there's singing. She swallowed and her eyes followed the path of the bite she had taken. Down, down, down. She marveled at the tapered thatch of hair between her legs. It seemed to point toward the ground. Never noticed that before, she thought. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, she thought. But she didn't know what she meant. "Howdy," Adam startled her. When she saw him standing between a lion and a wildebeest, the same blank look on all their faces, she hid the bitten apple behind her back. "What you got?" Adam said. "Nothing," Eve answered. "Okay," he said. "I'm just walking these two dogs." Then he walked away, lion on the left, wildebeest on the right. Eve wandered the garden till nightfall, savoring bites of the apple, making it last, renaming all the animals Adam had gotten wrong. Later, the apple gone, Eve lay next to Adam as something strange uncoiled inside her head. Thinking, she thought. This is called thinking. "Look," Adam said, pointing at his penis. "Porcupine," he said. Eve studied the stars. E equals MC squared, Eve's thinking said. "Go to sleep, dear," she said to Adam, "and cover that thing up. God knows no one wants to see it." And this is my final poem. I'm going to send this out. I know Dr. Q is here, and if there's anyone else here from the Stafford Writing Challenge, we're writing a poem a day in honor of William Stafford. And every day I'm just astonished at the work that I do and the work that my colleagues on that cohort do. Learning to be astonished. When asked, "Where do you get your ideas?" the writer Harlan Ellison always answered, "Schenectady." Ellison was a wise ass, but it's as good an answer as any. Imagine the sunlight in Schenectady bouncing off the savings and loan, prisming into rainbows on the other side of town. The smell of fresh cut grass rising up from the acres of Schenectadyan suburbs on a clear September morning that began chill and ended warmed by the sun. The music of Schenectady, diesel highways and jet fuel skies, breaking glass of burglaries, the gentle rush of just flushed toilets. There's a Schenectady behind every Schenectady.
Mm.
It's the work of our own wise ass, the soul, to answer that familiar question, time and time again. Where do you get your ideas? Schenectady. Astonishing Schenectady. Thank you all for listening.
Yes, Bob, thank you. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. And I urge you when you get a second to check out the chat. There's so much feedback that you've gotten. And I appreciate you for being with us and keeping the time. 1752. So that was close. That was perfect. 1752. I just let mine run. So, all right, Bob, I'm gonna buzz you out and then I'll beam you back in for our talk portion. So I will beam you out and beam you in. Kevin Carey's books include the poetry collections, The 115 to Penn Station, Jesus Was a Homeboy, Set in Stone, all from CavanKerry Press, not to be confused with Kevin Carey, who is not a press and is a person, and the co-written Olympus Heights. He has published three works of fiction: The Beach People, Murder in the Marsh, and a new novel, Junior Miles and the Junkman, Regal House, Fitzroy Books, which won the Patterson Poetry Prize for books for young readers and has been chosen for the Penn Faulkner Writers in the Schools program in Washington, D.C. Kevin is the co-founder of Molecule, a tiny lit mag, a, a new co-directed film, MFA, The Terminal Degree, a murder mystery comedy written with R.G. Evans, which premiered in April of 2025 in Salem, Massachusetts. And more information can be found on Kevin at Kevin Carey Writer. Everyone, here is Kevin Carey.
Hi, everybody. Um, Thanks, Dimitri and Gabe and R.G. for doing this. Um, I'm going to describe myself for the visually impaired. I have a tiny white beard on my chin, and that's more hair than I have on my head. And I wear glasses. That should be enough to get the image. Um, I'm going to read mostly from Junior Miles and the Junkman, but I wanted to start with a poem from a book called Jesus Was a Homeboy that was published with Kevin Carey. And just to tell you a little bit about uh, why I'm starting with this poem is when I go into schools to read Junior Miles and the Junkman, I often start with this poem I'm going to read because it's a poem about overcoming obstacles. And that's a lot about what Junior Miles is. So let me give this a go here. It's called Getting It Right. In grammar school, I stuttered, felt the hot panic on my face when my turn to read crept up the row. Even when I counted the paragraphs and memorized the passage, I'd trip on the first or second word, and then it would be over. The awful hesitation, the word clinging to the lining of my throat, rising only too late to avoid the laughter around me. I was never the smartest kid in the room, but I had answers I knew were right, yet was afraid to say them. Years later, it all came out, flowing sentences I practiced over and over, Shakespeare or Frost, my own tall tales in low-lit barrooms, scribbled in black-bound journals, rehearsing, anticipating my turn, my time, a way of finally getting it right. So I read that to the students to kind of let them know that anything's possible, right? That where you're at right now may not be where you end up. And uh, there is this idea in the novel Junior is disabled and he's bullied. His father passes away early in the novel, and he has a lot to overcome. And I feel like it sets the right tone before I read the novel. A little bit about how this novel came to be. Years ago, I took my children to an exhibit in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, at a museum. It might have been MoMA or the Pittsfield Museum. I can't remember. And there was an exhibit there called Springs, Sprockets, and Pulleys. And it was these life-size figures made of recycled material, junk. And a lot of them were in groups. Like there'd be three members of a band, and you'd press a button, and they were all on pulleys, and they'd move in a kind of synchronized rhythm. And my kids loved it, and I was fascinated by it. And way over in the corner of this exhibit was a solitary figure. His name was George. He had a watering can for a head and a fishing pole that moved up and down when you pressed the button. And I just started thinking that, of a story. What if that figure came alive? And so that percolated in my head for a few years. And Then I was in New Jersey. Bob and I went to the same MFA program, and the exhibit was in Morristown, right next to where we were in Madison. And I went and saw it again, and it started to feel like this idea was following me around. So I uh, I I got busy on it, and I had a draft of it, and I found an agent for it, and then that agent had it for a while and got some great reads, and they passed. The second agent had it. A third agent had it for over 2 years, and then finally I took it back and shopped it around myself, and found a publisher, Regal House Publishing in North Carolina, Fitzroy Books, and it came to be. But it was about 8 to 10 years from the time I thought of the idea. So I tell the students in the schools that, just to make them aware that you know sometimes the road is long, but you don't give up on the dream, right? So with that being said, let me just read some of the first chapter. I was born with one foot pointing west and one foot pointing north. The doctors tried to fix the west pointing one with a big ugly shoe that was 2 inches off the ground and weighed 3 pounds. By the middle of the day in kindergarten, I'd be dragging that foot behind me like a heavy hunk of coal. The kids called me Frankenstein even after my father let me throw the big black shoe away, because I still limped and dragged my foot when I got tired. Mama said I got rid of it too soon, but my father knew I was feeling like I was never going to fit in. He'll be teased forever with that thing, he told her. When will I walk like normal kids? I asked my father one day. He put down his newspaper, then leaned toward me like he always did with that twinkle in his eye, and said, "And what makes us normal, Junior?" His eyes drifted down toward my foot. "It ain't our feet." He looked back up. "Normal isn't a set of rules or what we look like. Be your own normal," he said, and went back to reading his newspaper. I wish someday I'd be able to see myself the way he saw me. To him, I was $1,000,000. To me, I wasn't worth more than a quarter. When we moved a mile down the road from the small white house on Riverside into the double wide trailer on the grounds of my father's junkyard, the kids had at me about that too. You couldn't get any lower than living on Riverside. Half the houses were boarded up since the factories closed, and the river that ran behind Broadway smelled like rotten eggs. Leave it to my father to find a way to set us even further down the social ladder. "Why'd we have to move here?" I asked him. "Opportunity," he said, smiling like he'd inherited a gold mine. Mama nodded, agreeing with me. Why, she whispered. My father was the proud owner of 40 acres of contaminated rock-filled soil, covered by every imaginable piece of junk known to mankind, all piled in sections to the sky like giant metal teepees. Piles of rubber tires, auto parts, construction waste, copper and cast iron, railroad ties, telephone poles dropped off by the city, and lines of wrecked car bodies, some piled on top of each other like building blocks, and none of it went anywhere. He was always trying to pull me into his world of junk, promising me a part in his magical transformation dream. "First thing we need, Junior, is equipment. We'll start with a masher and a crane." The truth was, as much as my father liked wheeling the junk around and crushing it, he liked sculpting it even better. Most of his time was spent in a little tin and wood shed about 100 yards from the trailer, back through the maze of piled junk, like a log cabin in the mountains. That's usually where I'd find him, all hours of the day, fastening pieces together with metal cement or a torch, turning junk into figures of animals, people, cars, and sometimes globs of unrecognizable metal. He was always coming home with something for us, pulling one of his creations from behind his back. a tiny angel made of tin strips and bottle caps, a bracelet of polished machine washers, or some perforated aluminum shaped into a foot-high Eiffel Tower. He'd hand the new creation to Mama, for you, darling, a junkyard special, he'd say, and she'd smile like it was some kind of diamond necklace. And believe me, when she smiled like that, not just with the corners of her mouth, but with her dark eyes sparkling, it made the whole world feel lucky for just being alive. I knew how she felt. When he gave me something still warm from the torch, a porcupine made of 10-penny nails, or a tiny ship cut out of a sardine can, I'd get all warm inside, like he was passing me magic itself. I knew it was just junk, but it was the way he could make anything into something else, like how he could make bad days at school, which were most days, into good nights at home. God doesn't make junk, Junior, he said to me often. Everyone has a purpose, and when you find yours, you'll be worth $1 million. I always believed what my father told me. Never once in 12 years did I ever have a reason not to believe it. Not even when that masher and crane sat quiet and the yard did nothing but pile up more junk. I believed him when he flipped pancakes one at a time on our little stove, pointing the spatula at me and saying, "These will put meat on your bones." I believed him when he told me driving in a schoolyard. I'm sorry. I believe him when he told me driving in a junkyard, but only in the junkyard, was legal for 12-year-olds, while he fastened wooden blocks on the gas and brake pedal of the old truck and let me drive back and forth from the shed. I believed him when he told me I was destined for wild adventure, or when he was soothing the wounds of another day at school with his promises of great things for me. I believed him when he held my face in his rough hands, telling me that he'd always be there for me. But the day he told me he had cancer and that he was going to die, I called him a liar and ran into the junkyard where I stayed until Mama found me in the back of a beat up old Chevy van. I had been crying for hours. It was hard to hold in the shakes. But soon hard became harder, watching my father each day transform into a shell of himself. He stopped cooking breakfast in the morning and was too tired to even talk. Mama said the medicine made him sleepy, but it seemed to me that his life had up and gone away before his body decided it was time. And even though I wanted to tell my father about the horrible days at school, dealing with the bullies and the nicknames, I couldn't. I wondered what I was going to do if he was really gone. But then a strange thing happened. One morning, my father jumped out of bed. "I got something to do," he said. And without changing into work clothes, he headed out to the shed and stayed there all day and night. The next morning, before I left for school, I could hear him banging and the torch going when I snuck by for a listen. And for the next 7 days, he holed up inside that shed, coming out only at night to sleep. I couldn't see what he was working on because he locked the door with a padlock and kept the key on a string around his neck. And then I guess he finished. He came in earlier than the other nights and lay down on the couch and back and went to sleep for the last time. I never thought it possible for a heart, my heart, and probably Mama's, to break into so many pieces. A week later, after the funeral, Mama handed me an envelope my father had written my name on. Junior Perfect Miles. A tear dropped from her eye as she passed it to me, one shiny wet line on her brown cheek. And as much as I wanted to rip it open, I couldn't. So I tucked it under my mattress. So I'm just going to read one more poem from that same book. And I feel like it's kind of fitting to end with this because we're talking about reading and writing, and I always tried to instill that in my children when they were growing up. So this is the last one of the last poems in this collection. It's called Reading to My Kids. When they were little, I read to them at night until my tongue got tired. They would poke me when I started to nod off after 20 pages of Harry Potter or Lemony Snicket. I read to them to get them to love reading, but I was never sure if it was working or if it was just what I was supposed to do. But one day, my daughter, 15 then, was finishing Of Mice and Men in the car on our way to basketball. She was at the end when I heard her say, "No," in a familiar, frightened voice, and I knew right away where she was. "Let's do it now," Lenny begged. "Let's get that place now. Sure, right now. I gotta. We gotta." And she started crying. Then I started crying. And I think I saw Steinbeck in the back seat nodding his head. And it felt right to me, like I'd done something right. And I thought to myself, keep going. Read it to me. Please, please. I can take it. Thank you.
Heaven, wow. Ah, it's such a good book. It's such a good book. And then linking Jesus was a homeboy to that is great. Do you find yourself when you're going to read from Junior Miles, do you find yourself bringing those poems often? Like, is that something you do with every school or
I haven't done it every time, but
yeah.
one I, a few times it just felt right. It felt like I was kind of introducing this idea of we all have struggles and we all try and get through them, and that's a theme in the book, and was certainly a theme in my life.
Hmm.
So struggles as a kid and as an adult, we can talk about that some other time. But and so it feels to me like it was always kind of a way of getting over, right?
Yeah.
Way of getting through stuff. So, um, yeah, I mean, I did it a few times, and it just felt right to kind of pair them, at the beginning of a reading, and kind of set up where I'm coming from with the novel.
Yeah, yeah. It's so intriguing because hosting things like this or going to open mics or seeing like featured presentation readings or headliners, it's always interesting to think how people end up approaching a reading, right? Like there's people that are part of the school where you go up and just read the poems and you let the poems speak for themselves. There's other folks that have like this more of a preamble, or you need things to connect to other things, or you need a story in order to enter this story, right? So I'm fascinated because both of you tonight had some sort of ushering in to the poem. You kind of led us into the poem, either if you were using humor, or if you were using some background, or saying, "Hey, this is feeding to the next thing." So, for Kevin and Bob, how do you approach whether or not you just do a performance or a reading where you just let the poem or the fiction be rather than explaining it? When do you choose to explain it, and when do you choose to just let the medium speak for itself?
I'll let Bob go.
Um, that's a really good question. When
Mm,
I was an undergraduate, I had a course with W.D. Snodgrass on oral interpretation of literature,
mm,
and he stressed the importance of always providing some sort of introduction to the poems.
mm,
And I think that I don't think that's necessary. If the poem speaks for itself, there's no reason to do that. Um, I've coined a I've I've coined a term that kind of talks about the poets that do that too often. There's the idea of mansplaining. Well, I call
Oh,
it poet-splaining. You
post.
know,
yeah.
when they tell here's the whole story of the poem, and then they read the poem's shorter than the preamble that they gave. But I mean, if there's an allusion or something that I think might be unfamiliar to the listeners, then I try to do an introduction, or if I have, if I have four sad poems about parents and then the next one's not, I like to say, hey, here's something a little different, now for something
Yeah,
completely different.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I like some conversation between the poems when I see other people read. I like getting to know the person or the poet a little bit,
Hmm.
or the fiction writer. And but yeah, Bob's right. I mean, sometimes somebody goes on and you want to yell out, "Is there a poem in there?" I like everything. I think there's a balance to it. I think if you can read and discuss and give some information, certainly if there's something obscure in the poem, I don't have a lot of poems that have things that need a lot of explaining. I don't think. But you want everybody armed with the right information so the poem makes sense. Beyond that, I kind of like to sometimes talk about where the poem came from, or some background to the place or the people that might be in the poem. And I don't know, maybe I'm just entertaining myself, but I do like to do that.
I mean,
Yeah,
I you say that a little bit as a joke or a realization near the end, but
yeah,
I think it's also important too for us to find different entry points into a work, right? Like and Bob, you can really vibe with this, but I always like the concept of when you're going to a concert, you're gonna get a different rendition of that musician's piece. It's going to sound different than it did when they were laying it down in the studio because they play it all the time. So there are going to be different renditions of how to do that, and I think it's important for us to kind of talk about different pieces when we're going into a poem or we're reading from a book also. And I think the main point of going to readings is to get that extra stuff, to get that personal background information about the book, especially if people have read the book or experienced some of those poems or pieces prior to that. So yeah, that's great, and that's good. And Bob, I always think of some of my own mentors. I have this mentor from the New Eurekan Poets Cafe who's a big performance poet. So they're the one that it's like just go in and let the poem speak for itself, even if you had to ad lib into it. And it's really interesting that on the opposite side, like someone who is more of a page poet would say that it needs to have some of that information in the beginning. So it's kind of cool to draw those things together. All right, great. So I have a question from Hippie Chick. Uh, Oh, wait. Yeah, so it wasn't a question, it was a comment. So Hippie Chick said, Bob, I didn't realize until now, after your poem about Emmett, that Carol Burnett was emulating him at the ending of her shows.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. And I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
I know she played that charwoman character. I guess that maybe that's what you're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. Yeah, but I don't remember her sweeping up the. I just remember him doing it, not Carol Burnett.
Oh, wow,
She's
wow.
still she's still alive and kicking and doing cameos on shows. It's
Yeah, I
unbelievable.
know she is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. And see, that's the importance of reading the things aloud and getting other people's opinions. It's so funny sometimes when I'm sitting at like readings or panels and I read something and someone will be like, "Oh, like I didn't notice this X, Y, and Z that you did in the poem. It was really great." And I had no idea that I did that. And then you just kind of like be like, "Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I meant." Okay,
I know
so
once you write the poem, it's none of your business anymore, right? I mean,
exactly.
it's all the readers.
It's all theirs now. You just kind of chuck it out there and just see what happens. So Kevin, I wanted to go back to the opening poem that you read from Jesus Was a Homeboy, where the speaker is, in a way, they're kind of growing into themselves as a reader and a writer. Can we talk about that beginning for the both of you? What kind of led both of you to start writing? Kevin, and maybe you could start since you kind of said it in the poem a little bit. Can you kind of massage that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I, I was kind of a weird kid, really. I mean, I had a stuttering issue in school, and oddly enough, uh, when I started playing basketball, it went away because I was a pretty good basketball player. And uh, but I don't think I really I like the idea of storytelling. I was a big movie fan, and um, I think I like the idea of it well
Mhm.
into my life, but sooner or later, I think if you want to be a writer, you have to do this thing called writing, right?
Mhm.
And you have to kind of get behind the desk and sit down and do the work. And I don't think I was ready to do that until later in my life. But once I was ready, um, I became pretty good at putting in the time.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was kind of a late start. Uh, but I think I'm starting to catch up. If I live another decade or so, maybe I'll have caught up by the end of it.
That's awesome, Kevin. Thank you. Bob, what was your start?
Well, it's interesting hearing Kevin was a weird kid. If he was a weird kid, I would be the one looking at him like he was one of the cool kids, I think.
Mm.
That's how weird I was. And I was floundering in high school. I wasn't an athlete, I wasn't cool, I wasn't in the band, I wasn't in drama. And
Mm.
I wrote a poem and submitted it to the school literary magazine, which they still had back then. And one of the English teachers published it for me. And she really encouraged me. And right about that same time, I started playing the guitar,
Mm.
and those two things kind of brought me into my own.
Yeah.
Um, and I came back to poetry very, very late. I started my serious writing as a horror story writer. I wanted to be Stephen King, but that job was already taken. And I had some success writing horror stories, and I just love the rhythms of them and whatnot. Um, but the poetry came back. Gosh, I guess after I got my first master's degree, I really started getting into writing poetry. And then, Kevin might have mentioned that we went to grad school together, and that really kind of solidified my role as a poet.
That's
You know,
amazing.
it's funny Bob says that because I was on a podcast the other day called Out of the Blue,
Mhm.
and I was I was talking about how um, I went into my MFA program as a fiction writer, and that's what I wanted to be.
Mm.
That's what I wanted to do, and I ran into these crazy Jersey poets, Bob being one of them, and started writing all this narrative poetry, and that's the thing that first happened for me, right? And the fiction was kind of put in the back seat for a little while. And but I really do believe that if you that you get put in these positions for a reason, and these people and Bob and Mark Herringhouse and Maria Gillen, these people were instrumental in introducing me to writing poetry. And my
Yeah.
poetry is pretty narrative. It's concerned with storytelling more than anything else, um, and it was a great foundation for me to finally get to do some of the other writing that I wanted to do later. You know.
Yeah, yeah. We actually, well, on this call, we know we have a writing group, and our crowds are usually mixed between people that have been writing for a long time. We get some university students or older folks that are writing for the first time, and I think it's a bit important to kind of talk about this idea of genre because we're talking about genre here, where it was horror, and then you go into poetry, and then Bob later you went into songwriting, and then Kevin you went to fiction, the poetry, but then back to fiction, and then back to some of these other things. Um, can you talk a bit about kind of trying to be a writer and fitting yourself into just one genre, kind of being an Achilles heel? And it's kind of important to not be so genre specific and just explore writing for what it is rather than falling into one thing. How did you all make that transition from one thing into the other? And do you feel comfortable just writing in a bunch of different mediums because you are an artist? You're not just necessarily a poet or a fiction writer.
I can start if you like, Kevin.
Yeah, sure.
I just think you have to learn to keep your antennae out, and
Mhm.
whichever impulse strikes you, uh, know that this is likely going to be. Oh, I'm suddenly rhyming and I'm writing in rhythm. That's probably going to be a song, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I've got an idea or something. That's probably going to be nonfiction. One of my teachers, Renee Ashley, said, if you have an idea, write an essay. If you have an image, write a poem.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I've earned an MA and an MFA, and the one thing neither of those programs gave me was discipline. in my writing. And this is a shout out to MP and Dr. Q here, who are in this William Stafford Writing Challenge on Facebook, where we're following his advice that, he wrote a poem every day. And when asked how did he do that, he said, I lower my standards.
Mm,
And I've been writing a poem a day since January 2024. They're
wow.
not all great. I read a couple of them here tonight. They're not all great, but I'm finding myself. I'm not sure this is answering your question,
It
Dimitri.
is.
I'm
Yeah.
find, I'm finding myself. I'm finding these voices emerging in my poetry that weren't ever there before,
Uh-huh.
and they're coming unforced. And that goes back to the idea. You have to listen to the impulse and don't force. Yeah, I can't generally sit down and say, I'm going to write a song now. I'm going to write a story now. The impulse has to be there, and I have to kind of listen to that and follow it.
Yeah. That was great, Bob. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Sometimes it happens by accident, though. For me, I had this idea. My father had passed away a few years before, and I had this idea about writing about my father digging his way up from the grave and coming to
Mm,
Thanksgiving dinner. And it was a farce kind of, and it was. Um, and I tried to write that as a poem for the longest time, and it never worked. There
mm,
was no way to make it work. And then I started to get a little more prosy with it and wrote it as a short story, and that became one of the short stories which is a very hard genre for me, actually, the short story. But that became a short story that made a little noise for me. And, had I just kept banging my head away at that poem, I don't know if it ever would have gotten anywhere. So
mm,
I think sometimes I have to be open enough to say, well, I like this concept. I like some images here. I like what's happening. Is it fitting into this poetry? Uh, you know, uh, uh, Form, or is it's something that needs a little more background to it? Does it need to be longer? Does it, and so that's happened a few times to me. Um, Oftentimes though, I kind of know, especially if I'm writing longer fiction,
mhm.
novel length fiction, that usually never starts as anything but that, you
Got it.
know. But I think some shorter things can often fall into a few different worlds and cross the line. And um, I see it a lot in flash fiction
Hmm.
and prose poetry. I see pieces in different collections that are anthologized in one or in both.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes things can exist in two worlds and still
Mm,
be the thing that they're in at the time,
yeah.
which can really isn't great advice. It's probably a little more confusing than it is great advice. But
Yeah.
um, I do think sometimes I'll just write something and ask myself, what is it? You know,
Right. Right.
Mm.
is this just a kind of recollection? Is this a piece of nonfiction? Is this a prose poem? And then I guess I'll try and make it whatever I decide on, you
Hmm.
know,
I think asking
successfully
that.
or not.
Yeah, I think asking that question is important, right? With like, I think a lot of newer writers, when they're first penning things down, they're just thinking about the production and they're not thinking about the process as much. And I think even those little questions of just like, well, what is in front of me? What does this want to be? It could kind of help get something moving. And I think, in answering the question, Kevin, I think you also mentioned something that a lot of writers, I know me as a younger writer in my MFA, I feared, and it was, am I going to be found out if this same subject is showing up in multiple ways elsewhere? Like, oh, am I pulling from my own resources? Am I kind of like copying myself? But no, actually, you're starting to develop a theme, right? And Jean mentioned something interesting in the chat, and she was wondering if the father image of coming up from the grave is somehow worked either on a conscious or a subconscious level, worked into Junior Miles and the Junkman.
Well, there's certainly some parts in there. Actually, I was going to read a part tonight, and then I decided that I just wanted to read from the beginning,
Uh,
where Junior's father is telling him a story
mhm.
and about being involved in politics with his father. And that was pulled kind of from my life. I mean, my grandfather was a mayor of the city I grew up in and became a state rep. And my father used to drag me around to these rallies,
Mm.
and they were crazy. They were a lot of drunk guys, a lot of cigarette smoke. And I'd sit in the corner reading these comic books that you could buy at the store for 5 cents because the covers were torn off.
Oh,
And
wow.
so they were cheaper. And I just kind of sit and be in the corner of all this kind of madness going on. So that, you know, my father and his stories or things I witnessed as stories, directly flowed into that book when I started writing about a father and son relationship, you know?
Hmm.
So, yeah, kind of. I didn't have him brushing dirt off him at the dinner table and
Yeah.
being kind of a zombie like the story is. But yeah, I mean, sure, some of that. Thank you, Gene. Some of that did make it in a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, Gabe was wondering that as well. Great. And Gabe had a question too. So Gabriel Cleveland is our director of CavanKerry Press and managing editor. And Gabriel's asking, well, Gabriel's first mentioning that he admires both of your abilities to capture tender, quiet moments in your poetry or prose and give them the gravity they deserve without overwriting. Can you talk about what it takes to recreate poignant experiences in your work? Particularly for the poems.
Bob.
Uh, yeah, I mentioned these voices emerging. Um, I'm thinking back to when I was in high school. I couldn't stand the stuff they had us reading in high school because to me, if nobody bled or nothing blew up, it wasn't a story.
Mhm.
It had to be big. It had to be like James Bondish, that kind of thing. And I think that as a starting poet, I began that way too, with kind of bombastic,
Mhm.
reach out and grab the reader by the throat type of things. Um, I got a message on my screen. Can you?
I can see you, yeah.
Okay, here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and I think the more I write, the more I realize that I don't have to grasp for the big subject. You know,
Mm,
the most effective poem, like one I'm thinking of from the reading, is putting those Japanese beetles in that box. And how, it was it had hundreds of Japanese beetles in the box. And as a kid, it was cool. But
uh-huh.
looking back on it, I'm thinking that was kind of an act of animal cruelty. What did I do with them afterwards? Now
Yeah.
more than ever, I hope I let them go. As I said that it's I think restraint is something that well, I shouldn't say you. Restraint is something that I've learned
Hmm.
through practice.
That's great. That's great. So, I mean, honestly, it's kind of that thing where you just gotta keep doing it, right? As you keep doing it, you kind of have these evolving moments, or these poignant moments where you make these little turns, and then it just gets tighter, tighter over
Mhm.
And
time.
not every poem has to be about the big subjects, death and
Mm,
war and
yeah,
love. It could be about Emmett Kelly sweeping up the spotlight. It's just like I said, have your antenna out, and when something presents itself, go for it and see what happens. Whether it becomes a short story or a poem or a song or what have you.
wonderful. Thanks, Bob. Kevin?
I had a writing teacher once, Rod Kessler was his name, and every time I tell him, "Oh, I remember when you told us this," he goes, "Did I say that?" But uh, I remember him saying something like, "Don't go," and whether he was talking about a story or a poem, I can't remember, but he said, "Don't go into it thinking I'm going to write a poem or a story about this theme, about this grander idea. Just get some people in there talking to each other, get some details, make it real, whether it's the poem or the story, and those universal themes are there. They're gonna kind of expose themselves anyway, right? So don't drive so hard at the meaning of it. I think it's more about crafting the presentation of it, right?
Hmm.
And just making it, um, you know, uh, ending that poem on the right image, right?
Yeah.
And I think I always have a tendency to overwrite in drafts and go too far and maybe start too late or start too early. There's always that optimal place that's in there to Bob would know this quote, and I'll probably butcher it, but it's the Paul Muldoon quote about the poet's job is to bring the reader to the party and then nip out the bathroom window.
Uh,
Like to find that place where you need to get out, right? Like you bring them there and then get out of the way. Don't damage the poem by adding on and adding on to it, right? So there is that sweet spot, and I'm not sure I have an exact science on how to get to that, except maybe ask some people to read it or
Yeah,
repetition or just keep reading it myself until it feels right.
yeah, yeah. I
I don't
think
know that Muldoon quote, Kevin, but I knew that Laura Baltz always used to say, "Get the reader out of get out of the lobby and get into the hotel with your poem." You
Yeah.
know,
That's good. I like that too.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a thank you so much. You all are displaying just a clinic of how to get from one spot to another in a piece. And I mean, I guess that's kind of like one of the most elusive things, right? On the subject of writing, like when a poem feels done. Kevin, you mentioned that have a couple of other people kind of beta test it to see how it sounds, right? And a lot of kind of conversations when you ask this question, it kind of summates itself to like it kind of just feels right. Do either of you have an offering on when do you feel like a poem finally feels finished? Is there something that you kind of default to that makes you feel in your spirit that yeah, that poem is done, it's time to move on?
Reading it out loud to people like at an open mic or a reading is a good test for me.
Mhm.
I often find myself wanting to edit on the fly when I do that. And it's a little different than reading it out loud to myself, which I do with everything.
Mhm.
It's kind of like when there's an audience there, I think the real strong editor shows up.
Interesting. Nice.
Mm.
Bob?
it's probably a fault of mine, but I don't. The whole reading here is probably going to explode when I say this, but I don't edit a lot. Yeah, and as I'm writing a poem, I'll kind of feel the ending coming up, and I'll kind of it's almost like a premonition of where it has to go, and that would be the end of the poem. That having been said, I submitted a poem to the Stafford Writing Group,
Mhm.
and you're supposed to request if you want feedback if you post it to this closed group on Facebook. And I didn't request feedback, and a couple of people offered feedback, and I was like, "How dare you? I didn't ask." And both of the suggestions that they made the poem so much better, So I'm always welcome. I'm always open to feedback
That's
now, I
awesome.
guess.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I have two last quick questions. Some folks are sending their goodbyes. I'll be sure to send that to you all with a chat after the reading. And it's been lovely, y'all. So just two questions to end this conversation. I feel like if we hit up any Jersey Shore bar, we're probably going to talk for a couple of hours. I think we're going to be around to last call together. So first, Dr. Q mentioned, so poetry readings, are they essential? What do
I
you
know I
think?
saw that question. That's a
Yeah,
great question. I don't think they're essential,
yeah.
but it does help me to try out new work. Something that maybe years ago I would have never thought of doing
Hmm.
because if it wasn't finished, it was too nerve-wracking. But now I'm just older. I don't care as much. And um, so I'm willing to try something out that may be terrible. I don't know. And
Mm,
it isn't so much that I'm looking for people to give me feedback at those. I feel it myself when
mm,
I'm reading it in front of people rather than to myself. Sometimes it's a little different, but
mhm.
you know, I don't think it's essential. I think you can eventually get there through repetition and just sticking with it.
Gotcha. Great answer, Kevin. Thank you. Bob, what's your take?
Well, for me, writing is about the writing.
Hmm.
And I mean, and I love poetry readings. I do them whenever I'm invited. I do, but I can only speak for myself. Poetry readings are about the ego.
Ooh,
It's about the immediate feedback. You know, you hear an audience react. Yeah, exactly,
yeah,
right. Or laugh at a poem that you don't think is funny at all. I have a poem in my first book. It's heartrending to me, and the last line just rips my heart out. And every time I read it, the audience laughs, and I find like Kevin said, it's not mine anymore. You know,
yeah.
it's out in the
Ooh.
world. It's apparently a funny poem to the world, not to me. But you know, I think you sit in a room alone and you write your poems, and you think they're pretty good, and then you go out to there's nothing I love more than reading a poem to an audience and hear somebody go.
Yeah,
I don't know if you could hear that, that intake of breath, but that's ego, for
yeah,
me, you know.
yeah. There definitely has to be some sort of a shedding of the ego in a way that has to happen when you're up there because it's such a vulnerable thing to be up there. But then transversely, there's also ego there waiting for the feedback or the moment, right? Hippie chick
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
Bob, it actually might be nervous laughter. So you
No, I was
the
just getting ready
poem.
to respond to her. No, it's raucous laughter.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
it's like canned laughter on I Love Lucy or something.
Yeah. Oh
They
man.
laugh. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, this is awesome. This is awesome. Okay, last question, and I usually try to end with this if there is time, and we do have the time for it. If you could give one piece of advice, we're closing the reading. If you could give one piece of advice to the poet that you were at the beginning of all of this, what's that one piece of advice you would give that young Kevin or that young Bob? I know.
I would advise them to come up with an answer to this question well in advance. No, I'll give you a real answer. But I don't know. Kevin, do you have something?
Yeah, I don't, I just I think I kind of stepped into this world with some trepidation,
Ooh, wow.
and I would just not bother with that. I think
Mm,
I would just go for it, and and because Bob's talking about ego, I mean, really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what other people think. It matters what you're writing and what you want to produce.
hmm
And if you believe in it and you write it, and somebody doesn't like it, too bad. So I think I was always nervous about that when I was starting out. Like, what are people going to think?
mm,
And so I think I would say to that poet, don't worry about it. Just
yeah.
believe in what you're doing and go for it. So I think I may not have jumped in at some opportunities that I could have if I wasn't nervous about it when I was starting.
hmm So, Kevin, Gene mentioned in response to that, the social responsibility of poets sharing. Um, I feel like there's a level two to that answer for you that I'm predicting that you're going to respond to. But I'm interested because you've published a lot and you're very good in the classroom with folks, and we saw it as an example here of being able to kind of guide us through your work. So within not having that trepidation and saying that you're writing for yourself, right? How do you when did you break down that wall of trepidation, and then how were you able to share that with an audience after that?
Oh, I'll just tell you a quick story. One of the
Yeah.
first poems I ever published in a magazine had this little reading up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I really hadn't done much of this. And I went up there, and it was a poem about a guy I worked with on the beach who died.
hmm
And so I read this poem. There were a handful of people in there. It wasn't very crowded. And a guy was walking by, and he stopped and he listened to it. And he came up to me afterwards and said he had just lost his brother. And we talked about the poem and the feelings and whatever. I can't remember what we talked about, but I remember driving home thinking, "Wow, that was so cool that we had a conversation over this poem," and and that made me think of uh, the Richie Havens quote. that he said, I'm not in the music business, I'm in the communication business.
Mm,
And
Mm.
and that's really what I think it's about. I think, I hope that I write things that other people can relate to.
mhm,
So there's some type of conversation, whether it's just them reading it or we actually get to talk about it. I think that's what makes me want to keep doing it more than anything else.
yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for that response, Kevin. Bob?
Yeah, I have an actual response now. And Kevin kind of touched on it. It's about ego. I would tell my younger poet self, put your ego aside.
Mm,
That poem you just wrote this morning is not the greatest poem ever written in the English language. You might think it is. Look at it again tomorrow, or look at some other poet's poems, and then come back to yours. And don't think that what you're doing. Uh, Choose my words carefully because I know the poems can do this. Don't think that what you're doing is going to change the world.
mhm,
Just focus on the work. The work is the important part.
mhm. Yeah.
Not the ego, not
Mhm.
thinking that you're why doesn't everybody love me as much as I think they should love me? I would definitely give that advice to my younger self. Not
Mm.
only in the world of poetry, but in just about every realm of my life. Period.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, and Bob, I understand what you're saying in terms of like approaching the words wisely. Like, we always think we write the next great American piece, right? But
Hmm.
the thing is, if you don't put that kind of weight on the poem, it won't crumble under the pressure, right? And then it'll then allow itself, once that pressure is released, to have that moment with Kevin and that person at that reading where Kevin was writing this poem for an experience, but it connected with someone else, right? And then they were able to walk away with it. Um, yeah, Steve Demont said a lot of jazz musicians will tell you it's not about the ego, it's about the music. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And
Amen.
yeah, and with that being said, I think now is a great time to say thank you to Bob Evans and thank you to Kevin Carey for spending this evening with us. I will one more time put information on their websites and where you could purchase any of their materials in the chat below. I will also, one more time for the folks in here, put all the information about CavanKerry Press where you all can learn more about everything that we're doing. Thank you so much, everyone in the audience that is still here. At this point in time, I am going to ask for everyone to unmute themselves and say your
Yeah, they
goodbyes.
unmuted. Oh my God.
Good seeing you guys.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all.
Everybody,
Yep.
thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Good
Great
night. Thank
reading.
you.
What a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thanks.
Lot to think
Enjoyed
about.
it.
Yep.